What's up, guys? My name is Greg, and this is Small Talk, where we discuss how faith fits in the big picture. And if you have children and you're interested in teaching them about sex, good touch, bad touch, and when is it appropriate to do those things, those are the questions we're going to answer today. You're in the right place. Well, today I am joined by Professor Parker. Good to have you, Nicole. How are you?
Doing great, thanks.
Now, I call you professor, but many people are probably wondering, what does she teach? What does she do? What do you teach? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I teach sexuality and scripture
Wow.
and biblical counseling
Very
as an adjunct faculty member at Southern Adventist University.
Awesome.
And other than that, I'm a homeschooling mom and a biblical counselor. I have a master's degree in biblical counseling.
Wow.
And
Wow.
a master's in pastoral ministry.
I want to just take all of that and pick your brain today. Because actually, as I've mentioned, what we're talking about today is we want to equip and educate parents on how do you talk about sex with kids. Now, you've got this pastoral counseling background, you're teaching sexuality in scripture, and you're a stay-at-home mom. I mean, you've got it all together. I just want to learn from you. We all do. How do you have these conversations with kids? So I guess the three things I want to talk to you about just now are, one, when do you have the good talk, bad talk conversation with your kids? You know, we talk about sexual predators, whether they be online or in person, at church or wherever they are. How do you equip your kids to combat that? And then, of course, I want to talk to you about when is it appropriate to have the whole sex talk with your kids, the anatomy of sex, where do babies come from, the birds and bees talk, as it were. When do you have that? How do you have it? And of course, if there are any resources that you could give us to better navigate these waters. And so let's start with the first one, good talk, bad talk. What is a good talk, bad talk conversation with kids? And how do you have that?
A good talk about sex should help kids feel like this is a beautiful gift from God, and yet it's not something that they should be messing with. Often, kids' first impression about sex is that it's bad, shameful, dirty.
Right.
You know, they discover, "Ooh, look, I've got a penis," when they're in the bathtub, and
Right.
their parents swat their
What's
hands
that?
away and are like, "Don't touch that! Don't touch that!"
Right.
And they're confused. Everything else about their body is good, and this part is bad.
Wow.
We don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And with my kids, now my husband laughed all the time at me, but I would tell my kids, who made your sweet little fingers? Jesus. Who made your precious little nose? Jesus. Who made your sweet little penis? Jesus. I wanted them to feel like this is something good and holy and pure from their earliest years.
Yeah.
So one of the important things is teaching kids proper names,
Okay.
but also just removing the shame and secrecy. When you talk about all the rest of their body parts, this is your knee, this is your elbow, this is
We don't talk
your
about that.
nose.
Right. Yeah.
And they ask, "What's that?" "That's your little booty. That's your little cookie."
Right,
No,
right. Yeah.
it's not. Give them proper names, because also then if somebody starts abusing them, they know what proper names are to tell you, to tell investigators.
Wow.
Kids
Yeah.
sometimes end up, "Well, Uncle Jack keeps playing with my cookie."
Right.
They don't know
Yeah.
what that means, and parents may not get it either.
Right. Right.
So you have to talk with kids from their earliest years, but make it a positive thing. I mean, obviously, they don't need to know what sex is and how it works
Right.
until much older. Basically, they don't need to know until they start asking, usually.
So now we're
You
talking
don't
about-
have to tell them how babies happen until they start wondering how babies happen.
Right. Right.
But at the same time, from your very, very earliest years, you want to start giving them a positive view of sex, of sexual organs, of the beauty of God's gift of their bodies.
Now, I said good talk, bad talk earlier, and I guess what I meant was good touch, bad touch as well. And I guess
Right.
that goes in there. And so far you're saying teach them the appropriate names for their body parts. Don't let them feel
Right.
any shame for who they are, what they have. But hey, God made that. It's beautiful. It's a good thing.
Right. I think a lot of parents are afraid to bring up sexual abuse with their children because they're afraid that will make their children think badly of sex or of their body parts. But there are some really good books that can be very helpful.
Okay.
That have warnings, good touch, bad touch kind of books. There are lots of those out there. Reading with your kids not only gives them the terms they need to know and understanding things like if somebody's touching in the area that your swimsuit always covers,
Right.
basic things like that.
Yeah.
But it opens up channels of communication. A lot of times kids don't talk about sexual abuse because they sense that this is something their parents are uncomfortable
Wow. So the
talking
parents
about.
haven't made that a comfortable environment or a
Right.
comfortable conversation
So
to
just
have.
bringing it up, talking naturally about things
Yeah.
is very helpful.
Okay.
And then kids feel like, and you can always emphasize to them, anything that ever happens to you, you can always tell me. From my kids' very youngest years, because I had been sexually abused repeatedly
Wow.
and by 3 different guys
Wow.
growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, before I was 18, 3 different guys
Yeah.
had been sexually abusive toward me.
Wow.
And that could easily have just stained me and permanently messed me up. But I think what actually hurt me the most was that I couldn't talk about it. I didn't have any way to come to grips with it.
Right.
And so I felt dirty, unlovable, and ashamed.
Wow. Wow. And so you're saying to combat that, be proactive, teach your children what is
Right.
appropriate, what isn't appropriate, and teach them that there isn't shame in who you are. And that,
Right.
and I think we talked a little bit off camera earlier, and you said something I want to just repeat. You said, and other people's sexual sins can't stain you.
Yes. Jesus makes it very plain when he says nothing that comes into a person can defile them.
Yeah.
In other words, nothing that happens to a person can defile them. And then right after that, he gives a list of sins that defile. He says, these are the things that defile a person. And he gives a list of sins that come from within our hearts.
Yeah.
Sexual abuse causes us to be tempted to sin.
Feel shame.
But those sins can be like thinking that my body is not beautiful, even though God made it.
Right.
Feeling like God can't love me.
Right.
Or obviously God isn't powerful enough to protect me, or he doesn't care enough to protect me.
Right.
So sexual abuse opens us up to temptation. It brings up these huge questions in kids' minds. Why is it that when I pray and ask God every day to keep me safe, but then Daddy keeps doing this to me and Jesus never makes it stop happening?
Wow.
It causes us to have real questions about the character of God. And these are the real things that cause damage. I mean, protect our kids from sexual abuse. By all means, I'm a huge fan of watching what the kids are doing, knowing who they're with, talking to them about safe and unsafe touch, making sure that they're, to the best of our ability, not around people who are unsafe, that, our computers have passwords and filters and everything else. But in the end, the real damage of sexual abuse is that it messes up our picture of God. It makes it more difficult for us to believe that we are loved and priceless.
Wow.
And so sexual abuse, what's the most damaging is what happens in our minds. Not the fact that we're abused, but that it sets off these cycles of doubt about God.
Right.
That's what parents need to help their kids be ready for.
Wow. And one way we're talking just now about is educating them on what is appropriate touch, what is not appropriate touch. So that's the what. What are some examples on how to do that? You mentioned one earlier, one, calling the genitals by their appropriate names, but 2, saying, hey, this is the part your bathing suit always covers. There's a reason why. Or how do you have that conversation about good touch, bad touch?
You have it over and over.
Okay.
In lots of different ways.
Okay.
That's the best thing. Kids forget. They can't even remember what, they ate for breakfast.
Right.
And I just talked with my kids regularly. I would say, if anybody ever touches you in a way that makes you uncomfortable, you always just let me know.
So just reinforcing that over and over and over.
Communication is what's really important. Some kids are communicators. My kids are communicators. So I knew that they would probably tell me.
Yeah.
But if I could emphasize to them any more that nothing that anybody does to you can defile you, I knew they would be much more free in talking with me
Right,
about
because now they're not coming to you feeling like I'm dirty and I'm ashamed.
They won't
but it's
feel
like
Mommy will be mad at me
right
if she knows
now it's
I
like
did
Mommy,
this.
somebody touched me where you said was really inappropriate.
Right. Another huge thing that parents can do is tell their children from their earliest years, you have a right to say no to people touching your body. If somebody insists on hugging children, and the children don't want to be hugged,
they have that right.
They have the right to say no. Now they have to be respectful. I always taught my kids, if you don't feel like letting somebody hug you, you don't scream and hit them, but you say, please don't. Now, if they start trying to reach down your pants, by all means, scream and hit them.
Right.
But until...
Use a dagger Mommy gave you.
That's right. Mommy will use it too.
Mommy will use it too. Hell hath no fury.
What I always wanted my children to know is justice will come to those who abuse, but you are not the one who abused. So if somebody ever touches you in an inappropriate way, you tell Mommy. You tell the police. we'll nab that person and we'll put them in jail where they can't do bad things to any other children. But even if we can't catch that person,
Right.
God will deal with that person. And I really wanted my kids to understand nothing that anybody does to you can make you dirty.
Wow. Wow.
And even if something happens to you, it doesn't permanently damage you. I think one of the biggest things that we can do to preserve our kids, because we can't be there every second,
Right. Right.
is to let them know, if anything happens to you, you let me know. God will take care of it. We will take care of it to the best of our abilities, and you will not be defiled. You know, some parents hover over their children. They never let their children be out of their sight.
Right.
I think that can be even actually more damaging to them than in some ways, getting into an abuse situation.
Wow.
Because if the kid gets the picture that, you know, I am not capable of protecting myself.
Wow.
You're setting them up for a lifetime of anxiety,
of opposed to equipping them on how to protect themselves.
And
or
worst comes to worst, what if they do get abused at some point?
Right.
Then they feel like this is the very thing that mommy was so afraid would happen, and my life would be shattered if it
now
ever
they're dealing
did,
with the
and now
sexual
it's
shame
happened.
and the fact they feel like they've let you down.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're going to feel like, I can't tell mommy
Right.
because she's going to think that my life is shattered. Mommy's going to collapse and I failed.
Right,
They
right.
think it's a bigger deal than it is. Whereas if they know if something happens, we'll deal with it.
Yeah. Okay. So dealing with our I guess approaching that, then we're talking about having this conversation with the kids over and over and over. Listen, you can tell daddy, you can tell mommy if anyone touches you and your penis or your vagina, say the words. Don't be afraid. Yeah.
Right.
Don't give them nicknames and little cute names. No. Educate your children. Now, when is there an age that's too early for that? Are we talking 4 or 5 years old for the good touch, bad touch conversations? Is that how early you recommend, or what would you recommend kind of
You know,
seeing and hearing about different cases and knowing how predators work? When do you have that conversation? Good touch, bad touch.
We're living in a terrifying world.
Yeah.
The book Predators by Anna Salter, if you want to have something to read that'll give you
Predators
nightmares.
by Anna Salter.
Predators by Anna Salter. Anna Salter went into prisons and interviewed sexual predators and did extensive research, because she said, as a psychologist, she was blown away when she was starting out practice. Like, why are so many kids abused? It must be just this place where I'm living. But she found, you know, all these different psychiatrists are all saying the same thing. We're all finding, we're just like, is it just my area? There's an explosion of this. I mean, I grew up going to a little bitty church in the middle of nowhere, bunch of old people. My parents helped start this church. I once counted, how many girls do I know? Every girl I could think of who ever darkened the threshold of that church. And how many of them were sexually abused? And I counted, out of 21 girls that I could ever think of who walked through that church door, 11 I knew were sexually abused.
Wow.
And 7 of the others I knew were in high-risk situations. You know, their mothers had boyfriends funneling in and out of the house regularly.
Yeah.
They had older brothers who were sexually aware.
Curious or active, whatever it was. Yeah.
So stepfathers. There were a lot of other girls I don't know if they were sexually abused, but I know that at least more than half of them were.
Wow.
And yet nobody talked about this. In fact, when one of the girls told me, I mean, I knew she was being sexually abused, and I knew which man in the church was doing it, and I reported it. I was told, that girl lies. No, she didn't lie.
Wow.
She knew way too much stuff to be lying.
Yeah.
And, you know, but this is the thing. It's an epidemic because nobody talks about it. Anna Salter says that the average sexual predator has 100 to 150 victims before first arrest, and many more afterward.
Wow.
Because we silence children. We shame them. We make them feel like
We don't educate
it's their
them.
fault.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do,
Right.
so they do nothing. And when they do come forward, we tell them to shut up. It wasn't a big deal.
So then what is a good age? Are we talking as soon as possible,
Yes.
it sounds like?
From very young, when my children were maybe 2-3 years old, I would just always let them know, if you ever feel uncomfortable with anybody touching you, you let mommy or daddy know.
That's good. Start
We'll always
reinforcing
be
that from a
there
young
for you.
age.
That's
Open that channel
right.
of communication. It's not an awkward conversation with mommy or daddy. You can talk to us about this.
Right. One predator started sexually abusing and assaulting me when I was probably 4 or 5 years old.
Wow.
Nobody ever talked to me, and my parents were so sure that I was safe because they weren't leaving me, you know, with babysitters. They were only leaving me with a close family member that they absolutely trusted. They had no idea.
Right.
But even when I tried to tell one time, I opened my mouth and I said, "Mama," and my voice froze. I lost my ability to speak.
Wow.
And I walked away. I must have been like 7, with just the most terrible sense of being trapped because I knew even my very body would betray me. I couldn't even talk when I tried to get help. Kids need to be able to talk. They need to know these lines of communication are open.
Yeah.
So probably every 3 or 4 months, I brought it up with my kids and said, did you ever think about if somebody did this?
Right.
And, how did things go with that person? Do you feel safe with that person? I was very vigilant. I am very vigilant with my kids, not letting them be in situations where they could be abused.
Right.
But I know too well that you can't
equip them as
can't
well.
hover over kids. You've got to send them out, let them know you are empowered to be fine if something happens.
So that's the good touch, bad touch. Early age, as soon as possible, teach them about their genitals. Don't make it a shameful environment, and keep having that conversation over and over and over. And eventually they are going to start asking about sex. So it's apparent that we have to talk about sex, right?
Yes. In our house, it kind of comes up naturally because I'm a counselor and I deal with a lot of homosexuality issues and things like that when people come to counseling or just addiction issues.
So they probably hear that word around the house.
So my children have heard about things. And I think that's also something that's been important because they see that my husband and I are affectionate. We love each other.
Right.
And, they've gone through their phases of, ooh, gross, and all that. But secretly, they love knowing that we're affectionate and talking about sexual issues. Then, they'd say, so why was that person so upset about this? I said, well, because somebody touched her in her bottom and hurt her. That's what they knew about my childhood. I told them many times, I just brought it up and said, when I was really little, somebody touched my bottom and hurt me and made me really sad. And that's why I'm really careful to make sure that nobody can touch your bottom and hurt you and make you sad.
Yeah.
I just put it in that framework.
Right.
If it hurts you or makes you sad.
Now, you mentioned predators by
an assaulter.
It's
SALTER.
And that's a bit of a read, I'm sure. A bit of a heavy read, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Now, when it comes to talking about good touch, bad touch, what's a good resource for that before we move on from there?
There are some books called Good Touch, Bad Touch, things like that. I've had several that I read with my kids, just, showing pictures for very, very small children. There are a lot of good ones. It's not really just like there's one.
Right.
But you look up something that says something about safe and unsafe touch.
Okay.
Or it's okay to say no.
Yeah. And I'll pick your brain after this as well. We'll put those videos in the description below if you're looking for some content. If you're listening on our SoundCloud or podcast, then we'll have those in the description as well.
An excellent book for parents to read also is by Patrick Crew. It's the old title is The Serpents Among Us.
The Serpents Among Us.
But there's a new title. It's basically focused on predators in the church.
Yeah, I think someone from our set team had that title. What was the name of that new title? We'll get that. We'll put it in the description as well.
Yeah, it's about predators within the church, because one of the best places, if you're a predator and you want to sexually assault children, one of the best places to do it is at church. Wow. Especially if you can get into a position as
that sounds like the safest place
youth pastor.
To be.
Exactly. If you're my youth pastor, I've never met you. I may come in, what's your name, shake your hand, leave my kid with you. You'd have to work months and even years to get that kind of access to my kid without that assumed trust relationship.
But because of the position in the title,
so
that trust
sexual
is just
predators
given.
go for positions as doctors, coaches, teachers. They watch for single moms whose kids are vulnerable and say, I just saw your son's looking like he's kind of feeling lonely. I know you don't have a dad figure for him. How about if I come over and shoot some baskets with him? If you can get this kid into your clutches,
right.
Most of the time, predators will cultivate a strong relationship with the child. Then they say, hey, let's take some goofy pictures. Or they show them a movie or some porn.
Get their mind going.
Then they say, I'm not going to tell your mom that you watched that with me.
Right.
But, here's some makeup.
Right.
Let me take some nice pictures of you modeling.
Right.
Or whatever it is.
That's how it all begins.
And then once they say, now unbutton your shirt a little bit farther. Once they've got some pictures or something like that, and there are hundreds of ways that predators can get kids under their control.
Right.
But they can motivate you out of either fear or emotional connection. And either one of those is incredibly powerful to keep a child or a young person under your grasp, especially if you're in spiritual leadership.
Right.
You can even tell them, God wants you to submit to this. This is God's plan for teaching you about sex.
Right. And I guess to combat that emotional connection or even out of that fear, using those two tools, have those reinforced conversations with your children over and over and over.
Yes.
Ensuring that you've got that emotional connection and that open communication with them, to where if anything were like that to happen, they're comfortable communicating.
Yes, and watch that, not only you have a close relationship with them, but watch
Right.
their relationships with other close adults, because
Yeah.
if they feel deeply attached to this person, they may
Right.
behave like they're doing just great when they're around that person.
Right.
But if that person's giving them gifts, money, if there are unexplained long conversations or absences,
Right.
start being suspicious.
Yeah.
Your child starts changing in behavior,
Yeah.
bedwetting,
Yeah.
having fears,
Terrors in the
nightmares,
night.
things like that. Pay attention to those.
Yeah. Or even, and
things.
it's going to be something kind of random, but sleepwalking. If your child starts sleepwalking out of nowhere, that's also a
Yeah,
sign
and
of
if it's
trauma.
just one thing and you talk with your kid, you take him to the doctor, okay, everything seems to resolve.
Right.
But if they're suddenly very moody, they're suddenly unexplained crying, shouting, withdrawing from you,
Yeah.
just
There's a
pay
sign.
attention to their significant
flags.
relationships, not just with adults over them, but maybe their close friends, because kids are exposed to porn on average between the ages of 8 and 12 nowadays.
And that's what I want to talk to you about just now. We've talked about good touch, bad touch. We talked about how the conversation about where babies come from when they're curious about it, when they want to know. Don't put it off, because if you don't tell them, someone's going to tell them, right?
That's
so,
right.
Tell them about their body parts at an early age, but when they are curious about sex, tell them about sex, right?
Right.
Now, let's talk about that. You mentioned pornography. What if your child's already been exposed to pornography? You're having to do some damage control, right? I mean, you don't know what kind of porn it was. In another talk that we've had, you mentioned that 89 or 90% of pornography is violent in nature. So you don't know what kind of porn your child has just watched. What's the damage control procedure there? If your child has already watched porn and you discover it, or they tell you,
Or you suspect
or you
they
suspect
have.
it, what are some tips you could give to parents in that situation?
Again, opening up the lines of communication is critical. Talk about things in conversation. I read this awful article in the news. I'm so sad that happened to that poor kid. But if anything ever happened to you, I would want to be sure you told me. Just know you can always talk to me. Little things like that. Just weave it into your way of living, that they know they can always talk to you about anything.
Right.
One of my kids came to me not long ago and said, "What is this?" and described a graphic sexual act. And I was like, "Oh, where did you hear about that?" Well, they randomly had been in the company of a kid I didn't know, and the kid had said something about this, and I said, "I'm really glad you asked. Here it is." No, what?
Yeah.
We're not letting you.
Right,
Just keep the conversation open. But for
because
kids,
you want that to happen again in the future. If it happens again, you want to
Right.
know. So if it's a bad reaction, now they're like, "Oh, I'm not telling mommy, like she freaked out last time."
Right.
Yeah.
One of my kids once, when I was talking with him in worship, and I said, "Do you have any bad secrets? Anything that you feel like you could never talk about, or something that you've done that was bad that you need to confess?" And one of them got really quiet and said, "I do have a bad secret, but it's so bad I can never tell."
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh, really? Do you want to talk to me about that?" "No, I can't talk about it." Okay, so, that was definitely not something I was going to skim over. So we talked about it several more times during the day, and I just focused on snuggling this kid, holding him on my lap, saying, "Hey, anything that you want to talk about? Do you feel like talking about that yet?" No. Finally, that night, my husband got it out of them, and it wasn't that big a deal in many people's minds what had happened.
Right.
But for my child,
That was big.
it was huge. And that was the thing. They just needed to talk. So, my husband and I strategized. What do we say? Let's ask, is it this? Is it that?
Right.
Could it be this?
And in the process, you're just loving on
Right.
them.
And so,
Loving
yeah.
on them.
And finally, my husband was just stroking them on the back and said, "When I was a kid, I was really curious. And maybe that's your problem." And it came out. I was just so curious. And this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just tune into your kids.
Okay.
Watch if there's something going on.
Yeah.
But know that most kids are going to be exposed to porn. So with my kids, I've made it a strong emphasis to them, look away. If ever you see something, look away.
And
if
do you
ever
explain
somebody
why?
shows you a phone, if you see something that you know is bad,
Right.
look away.
Yeah.
Just look away. And, I've always told them, I said, I know someday something's going to pop up on a screen in front of you. You can push that button at the corner of the screen, turn it off, come and get me. I'll take care of it.
And I love how real you are with your kids, because some parents would just, they'll say, "If this ever happens, you're in trouble," or they'll make like this environment where it's just dangerous and it's not comfortable, and if you ever do this, you're bad. But it sounds like you're creating an environment where it's like, look, this may happen someday, and when it does happen, it's not going to be good for you. click away or look away or move away from that kid or get away from that device
Right.
and come find me.
And I've just said, I know you're going to be curious about these things. You can always ask Daddy or me about anything.
Yeah.
But if ever you do watch, number one, don't watch. But if ever you do watch, just talk to me about it.
Right.
Talk to Daddy about it. We'll take care of it. Jesus can wash it away. Your heart can be clean again. The only problem is those things stay in your mind, and it can be really hard for you to get over them. So that's why I don't want you to watch those things. They have to know that this is not a permanent defilement. If anybody ever sexually abuses them, this is not life-shattering.
Right.
That's really sad that it happened to you. We'll deal with it. We'll seek justice and relieve the oppressed, but what we're not going to do is say, your life is now over. Because that's what I felt. I felt nobody could ever marry me. No one would ever want me. I was so ugly. I was so worthless. Because I hadn't had this kind of preparation.
Wow. Nicole, as always, you've given a lot of information and a lot of resources to combat a really, I guess, real issue that parents are dealing with. And that's how do we approach the subject of sex in a world that is saturated, it's sold, you can walk into Walmart and see a picture of a woman skimping around in her bra, on display.
Right.
How do you combat or shield your children from sex? And it sounds like it's creating an environment where they're comfortable talking about it with you.
There's a really good book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures.
Good Pictures,
about
Bad Pictures.
porn-proofing your kids.
That sounds
That's another
amazing.
one that's
Good Pictures, Bad
fantastic.
Pictures.
Read these things often with your kids, but more than anything, talk with them often. Just let them know this is a normal topic that everybody is interested in. It's not you. You're not weird or twisted.
Don't allow
We're
them to feel
all
any shame about their
interested.
parts. Give them the appropriate names for their genitalia. Tell them they're beautiful. Tell them that's the way God created them, and let them know if anyone's ever touched you here, you can talk to me about it.
One time, one of my daughters saw something pop up on a screen. I didn't see it, so I don't even know exactly what it was, but we were visiting somewhere else. And she said that this woman was pulling off her shirt from one shoulder. She immediately grabbed my sons, turned them away from the computer screen, and as soon as she could, came and talked to me and said, Mommy, there was something bad that was coming up on that computer. And I saw another little girl who was there look at it. Can you be sure and tell their parents too? That's what I want. I want my kids to know you can turn away. We can take care of this. But above all, you're still pure when you're surrendered to God, no matter what happens.
Amen. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. This has been awesome. And if you want more of these resources, we're going to put them in the description below. If you're listening on our podcast, look in the description. We have all these books listed there. Thank you. At some point, our audience is they're going to want to know, how do we get a hold of you? They want to pick your brains for themselves. Is that information you'd be comfortable giving? Maybe
our website is heartthirst.com. Like a thirsty heart getting a drink.
Awesome.
Heartthirst.com.
Okay.
We have a lot of resources on a huge variety of topics. Sexual purity, but also dating, love, marriage, spiritual connection with God,
like a
devotional
one-stop
life,
shop.
healing from abuse, from emotional issues, whatever.
Wow. Heartthirst.com. We'll link that as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to the next time we could just pick your brain. Friends, this is Small Talk, where we discuss how faith fits in the big picture. And this is a big one, and we hope that you've been blessed. Share it with a friend. We'll see you next time.